Another way this shows up for me a lot is I'll treat someone's, let's say, back or neck indirectly, and then a day or two later, they will be going to, say, turn off their alarm clock. And so we use this example, we indirectly treat this, and then someone goes to turn off their alarm clock, and they'll get a grrrm unintentionally. Prior to treatment, they'd do that, and there wouldn't, it's not mobilizing on its own. But once you take care of the soft tissue restriction and the ligaments and fascia, then the articular restrictions will mobilize with normal motion. So that's pretty cool. But this gives you a little bit of an understanding of where chiropractic sits relative to osteopathy. It's just, we have so many more chiropractors because it's easier to open a chiropractic school. The admission rates to chiropractic schools are really high comparable to osteopathic schools or MD schools, because you don't have full practice rights as a chiropractor. You don't have access to prescriptions. You're not able to do any of the surgical specialties. So it's a little easier for the schools to get approved, but it's also not as demanding, so they can put more people out. And so people know more about chiropractors for that reason. There's just more of them out there. And historically, osteopaths have been maligned by MDs. And it was because osteopathy was started at a time where MDs were using poisons as medicine. That a baby would have a fever and they'd give it brandy, or an adult would have a fever and they'd give them mercury. And they're regularly telling people to use heroin and opium and cannabis and cocaine and alcohol for weird conditions. Just look at how George Washington died. He died from being bled. Right? Bleeding was another very common practice. So the founder of osteopathy was just discouraged. Being a physician himself, he was discouraged by the fact that they weren't practicing based off of logic and evidence, but were practicing based on tradition. And whenever the tradition was challenged, people would get, all in an uproar, and they would reject the person who was challenging them rather than to actually look at the issue logically. And still experienced this firsthand. He had quite a few of his immediate family members die, his wife and his children, from spinal meningitis. And he had access to the best physicians in his area, and they were unable to help. So that's what really drove his desire to develop some sort of practice that was based on logic. And he had this firm conviction in God, and this conviction that God wouldn't create a world where we couldn't figure out the causes and resolve the causes of these problems. His wording was, he couldn't be a guessing God, but that with the resources we had, there should be a ladder of logic we could climb to solve these problems. And so he did what he could, being a single person without access to creating huge, randomized studies. He studied the basics of what he could. At the time, they weren't the basics. He studied what he knew was factual. So he studied anatomy, he studied physiology, and out of that came osteopathy. So we already mentioned that one of the principles in osteopathy is that structure and function are interrelated, and the body has the ability to heal itself. The other principle is that we can't fully understand the body by breaking it down to its individual parts, because that's not how it exists. It exists as a whole. So we need to understand the individual parts in service to understanding the whole, and treat the person as a whole. And we can't separate out any aspect of the person in their treatment. We need to look at them holistically. So this is before the word holistic was really even used. Osteopathy was holistic. So we're talking about someone's emotional life, their relationships, their relationship with their work, with their spirituality, and the physical body, that all of these reflect into each other. And we can easily see that by someone who's sad. Well, they have a posture that signifies it. Someone who feels deflated, they look deflated. Someone who's proud and confident, well, they have a posture that signifies it. So we can see that blurry margin between emotions and physicality. But the same is true with the mental aspect of us and the spiritual aspect of us.